Jim Neidhart was a total force of nature in the ring, possessing a maniacal laugh and a wrestling style that made him the ultimate wingman for Bret the Hitman Hart. He transitioned from shattering shot-put records to becoming a WWE icon, tossing rivals across the ring like rag dolls while decked out in his signature pink and black gear. But in 2018, the Anvil dropped for the last time. James Henry Neidhart entered the world on February 8th, 1955 in Montebello, California. You could see he was built different right from his days on the high school track field. Imagine young Jim stepping up to the circle, the crowd falling silent. What happened next was pure magic. He launched that shot put so far, he smashed the California state record. That throw was so monstrous that nobody touched it for 12 long years at Newport Harbor High. That wasn't just a lucky break. Jim had the kind of freakish strength that would make him a legend down the road. But initially, Jim had his eyes on the gridiron. With that insane power and natural speed, the NFL came knocking. By 1978, he was suiting up in silver and black for the Oakland Raiders, a squad famous for betting on wild talent. When that gig ended, he got a shot with the Dallas Cowboys. He was right on the edge of football stardom, but life had a curveball waiting. Sometimes the biggest breaks come wrapped in failure. While the NFL dreams didn't pan out, Jim's terrifying physical presence grabbed the attention of a man who would flip his script entirely. Stu Hart, a god in the world of pro wrestling, saw a spark in this tank of an athlete. Hart had a sixth sense for finding raw diamonds, and in Jim he saw a main event player just waiting to explode. Those years hurling heavy metal balls and running football drills weren't wasted. That explosive power built over years of grinding was about to find its true purpose in the wrestling ring, where brute force meets high drama. Inside a basement in Calgary, a place that reshaped the industry future, legends were forged in sweat and agony. They called it the Hart Dungeon, and it was light years from your local gym. When Stu invited Jim down there, nobody realized this basement would define his entire future. The dungeon was a torture chamber, plain and simple. Beneath the Hart family home, guys learned the business the hard way, enduring real submission holds. Neighbors could literally hear the screams coming from underground. And soon Jim's voice was part of the chorus. But here's the twist: while others just tried to survive, Jim actually thrived and got tougher. And hey, if you're enjoying this trip through wrestling history, smash that like button so we can keep these legends alive. Jim found more than just a career in Calgary. Between the brutal sessions with Stu, he caught the eye of Stu's daughter, Ellie. The chemistry was instant. Ellie knew the business inside and out, having grown up watching her dad break guys in half. They fell for each other while Jim was learning the ropes. A romance blooming in the toughest environment imaginable. Their wedding in 1979 wasn't just a marriage. It welded Jim to wrestling royalty. The powerhouse from California was now officially part of the Hart clan, the family that had run the business for decades and wasn't stopping anytime soon. But marrying Ellie was the catalyst for something even more massive in Jim's career. Being in the family opened doors Jim never saw coming. As his ring skills sharpened and his bond with the Harts deepened, something huge was on the horizon. A tag team partnership that would rattle the industry was just around the corner. Jim didn't realize it, but his defining moment was loading, and it changed the game. At the famous Calgary Stampede, Stu saw an angle to turn his son-in-law into a star. This annual festival wasn't just rodeos and carnival rides. It hosted these wild strength contests. One of them was the Anvil. Toss a challenge that would literally give Jim his name. Stu pulled Jim aside with a proposition that proved just how smart he was at the wrestling business. $500 was on the table if Jim could win the Anvil toss. In the 1970s, that was serious cash. But Stu knew a win here would hand Jim something money couldn't buy. A gimmick that fans would remember forever. The competition day hit with the summer heat baking the Stampede grounds. As Jim walked up to throw, the crowd went hushed. The Anvil, heavier than most people could budge, sat there. In a show of absolute beast mode that dropped jaws, Jim launched that heavy hunk of iron and insane 11 feet and 2 inches. That win did more than fill Jim's pockets. It birthed a wrestling persona that stuck for life. The Animal. His old nickname just didn't do justice to what the fans had just seen. But the Anvil, now that told a story. It screamed raw power, blue-collar grit, and the kind of strength that makes even the toughest guys take a step back. Stu's bet paid off big time. That afternoon marked a massive shift for Jim. He wasn't just another guy on the roster anymore. He became the Anvil. It was a moniker that would ring out in arenas for decades, perfectly describing his brute force and that tough-as-nails attitude Calgary is famous for. Back in 1985, the wrestling business was undergoing a seismic shift. Vince McMahon was at the epicenter of this earthquake. He wasn't satisfied with running a regional promotion. He wanted it all. Vince moved like a predator, aggressively expanding his territory and snatching up top-tier talent from rival promoters. His gaze eventually settled on two rising stars out of Western Canada. At first glance, Jim Neidhart and Bret Hart seemed like a mismatch. You had a powerhouse capable of throwing heavy iron around, paired with a technical wizard who could tie people in knots. But McMahon knew that sometimes the weirdest pairings create the best magic. He saw potential gold in this odd couple. It was a fusion of raw violence and surgical precision. Then came the wild card Jimmy Hart. Known as the Mouth of the South, this manager carried a megaphone and enough energy to power a small city. Adding him to the group was like pouring jet fuel on a bonfire. Putting that loudmouth with Bret and Jim was pure genius. Jimmy handled the trash talk and worked the crowd into a frenzy while the athletes took care of business inside the squared circle. The Hart Foundation wasn't just a team, they were a brand. Clad in neon pink and black, they popped off the screen. Jim's explosive strength meshed with Bret's technical skills perfectly, like a dangerous version of peanut butter and jelly. They were writing their own chapter in the history books. Looking back, 1985 wasn't just another calendar year for Jim. It was his launch pad. The Hart Foundation would evolve into one of the most decorated factions in the game, proving that individual skill is great, but finding the right partner creates immortality. Inside that WWF ring, they were cooking up something revolutionary. This wasn't standard tag team wrestling. They were completely changing the rhythm of the match. Bret Hart would dissect opponents with the precision of a surgeon, and then Jim would tag in to shake the ropes and launch bodies into the stratosphere. It was like watching a grandmaster chess player team up with a human wrecking ball. Their rivalry with the British Bulldogs is the stuff of legend. Davey Boy Smith and the Dynamite Kid were the perfect foils for them. Since all four men survived the infamous Hart Dungeon, the chemistry was undeniable. These bouts weren't just athletic contests, they were violent, high-speed ballets that left the audience gasping for air. Every hold and counter told a deeper story. Do us a huge favor and smash that like button. If you want to see more legends get the recognition they deserve. When these teams collided, it was absolute magic. Then came February 7th, 1987. The landscape shifted again. On Superstars of Wrestling, the Hart Foundation finally hit the jackpot. Defeating the British Bulldogs for the gold wasn't just a win, it was a hostile takeover. The Pink and Black Attack had reached the summit, and they looked pretty comfortable on the throne. They ran the division for almost a year. Challengers like the Killer Bees tried to use speed and double-teaming. But the champs shut them down. The young stallions brought energy, but they got taken to school. The hard way. Strikeforce thought they had a strategy to beat them, but Bret and Jim proved to be an unsolvable puzzle. Each defense made them look stronger. Bret would wear down the opposition with technical holds while Jim prowled the apron like a caged beast waiting to feed. Opponents had to pick their poison, get stretched by the sharpshooter, or get flattened by Jim's massive power slam. This reign was a seminar on tag team dominance that future stars would study for decades. By the time the summer heat of 1988 arrived, a new threat was looming. Demolition arrived on the scene like walking nightmares in leather and spikes. When they clashed with the Hart Foundation at SummerSlam, the impact was enough to rattle the arena's foundation. Jim stood toe-to-toe with Axe and Smash, proving he could brawl with the scariest monsters in the company. But it was the series of matches against the Rockers that really opened everyone's eyes. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty were speed demons flying around the ring as if gravity didn't exist. Most heavyweights would get dizzy trying to keep up, but Jim revealed a hidden layer of agility. Weighing in at 280 pounds, the Anvil adjusted his game instantly. He would snatch the Rockers out of the air, using their own momentum to crush them while keeping pace with their frenetic style. Those bouts in 89 and 90 were undeniable evidence that Jim wasn't just a brute, he was a world-class athlete. While other big men relied solely on, it was the classic bait and switch. Jim proved he wasn't just a one-trick pony. One night he's exchanging heavy hits with the Giants, and the next he's keeping up with the speed demons of the roster. Inside that squared circle? Against the Rockers, Jim peeled back the curtain on skills nobody expected. It wasn't just about brute force anymore. The guy had serious ring IQ and agility. Whenever Michaels or Jannetty tried an aerial assault, Anvil was waiting with impeccable timing to shut it down. These weren't just standard bouts, they were masterclasses on how a veteran stays relevant. Through these rivalries, the Anvil confirmed what the diehards already suspected. His game was way deeper than just size and strength. Whether he was weathering the storm from demolition or matching the frantic pace of the Rockers, Jim demonstrated that a top-tier talent has no limits. His knack for switching gears while keeping that powerhouse vibe is exactly why fans still rave about these showdowns today. Fast forward to the heat check, the Hart Foundation's beef with Jimmy Hart's squad was at an all-time high. Their former manager was now public enemy number one, making every encounter deeply personal. At the 1989 Royal Rumble, they recruited Hacksaw Jim Duggan, the Patriot with the loudest voice in the building. United, they squared up against the vicious trio of Dino Bravo and the Rougeau brothers in a match that blew the roof off. We're talking 2 out of 3 falls. The ultimate endurance check in this business. One pin doesn't cut it, you have to double down. When the smoke cleared the foundation, and Duggan were the ones with their hands raised, striking a blow for the good guys. By the way, smash that like button if you want to see more legends get the respect they deserve. That win was a statement. The pink and black attack was officially on a roll. WrestleMania 5 threw another obstacle their way. The Honky Tonk Man and Greg Valentine. This wasn't a filler segment, this was the grandest stage of them all. The Hart Foundation had stepped up and added another W to the column. But behind the curtain, the script was flipping. Both Bret and Jim were starting to get that itch for solo stardom. The untelevised house shows became their experimental labs. While the world saw them as a unit, these nights revealed they could stand on their own 2 feet. Jim specifically was turning heads. The Anvil was done settling for just tag team glory. He was hungry for more. He set his sights on Rick Rude's Intercontinental strap, and suddenly the guy famous for chucking anvils was chasing singles gold. The bouts with Rude highlighted a fresh dynamic for Jim. The seat ravishing one was a technician who played mind games, forcing the Anvil to reach into a deeper bag of tricks. These fights proved Jim wasn't just a tag specialist, he could hang with the elite solo acts on the roster. Every near fall had the crowd on the edge of their seats, thinking the Anvil was about to shock the world. Los Angeles Sports Arena, WrestleMania 7, 1991. The biggest night in the industry was about to get gritty. A year back, the Hart Foundation had crushed the Bolsheviks in seconds, but this time they were staring down a different beast. The Nasty Boys, a duo that didn't just bend the rulebook, they shredded it with a grin. This wasn't a wrestling match, it was a demolition derby. The Nasty Boys brought their street fight mentality, turning the canvas into a crime scene. Knobs and Sags didn't care about holds, they cared about inflicting pain. The Hart Foundation tried to keep it classy, relying on their chemistry and technique. But in this game, nice guys often finish in second place. The moment Jerry Sags grabbed that motorcycle helmet, the vibe shifted. The ref was busy looking at the wrong guy at the absolute worst time. The sickening thud of metal meeting bone rang out as the helmet crashed into Jim's skull. Even the Anvil, with all his durability, couldn't shake off cold steel. He went down like a sack of bricks. Brian Knobbs, looking like the cat that ate the canary, jumped on for the pin. The officials hand-slapped the canvas 3 times. Just like that, the era was over. The Nasty Boys partied like they earned it, but the fans knew the score. That helmet shot wrote a controversial new page in tag team lore, even if it left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. This wasn't just a title swap, it was the closing of a chapter. The Hart Foundation had elevated the division with pure skill. Now the gold belonged to 2 brawlers who hijacked it with a weapon. The business is ruthless, but sometimes the dirtiest tactics grab the headlines. The LA crowd was stunned watching the Nasty Boys parade around with stolen property, while Jim and Bret were left picking up the fragments of their championship run. The early 90s didn't just signal the end of their reign, it solidified their status as the pioneers who redefined the game. They were the masters who left a permanent mark on the industry. Bret and Jim didn't just wrestle, they redefined the entire game for tag teams. If you go back and watch any Hart Foundation tape, you are looking at the master blueprint they drew up. It went way beyond Bret's technical genius or Jim's brute force. It was all about how they meshed those two worlds. When Jim would snatch a guy out of the air and crush him with a power slam, it wasn't just a maneuver, it was poetry in pink and black. Bret would methodically dismantle a guy's legs, setting the table for the Anvil to come in and close the show. That wasn't just tactics, that was storytelling that hit the fans right in the gut. Those iconic tights became a symbol. In an era drowning in neon spandex and chaotic designs, the Hart Foundation kept it crisp, sharp, and lethal. Every time they walked through that curtain, they looked like legitimate threats. That strictly business vibe became their trademark, pushing an entire generation of talent to step up their game. But honestly, their biggest asset was their adaptability. One night they are trading heavy hits with monsters like Demolition, and the next they are keeping up with aerial artists like the Rockers. They proved a top-tier team didn't have to be a one-trick pony. This flexibility set the new benchmark. To wear the gold, you had to be ready for any style, any time. Decades later, when fans watch fresh teams climbing the ladder, the Hart Foundation's DNA is all over their style. The double-team mechanics, the impeccable timing, the ring psychology, it all traces back to the foundation Bret and Jim laid down. They were champions, sure, but they were also the professors of the division, schooling everyone on how it's done. But inside the WWF's shifting landscape, Jim hit a major turning point. By 1991, the Hart Foundation was history, but the Anvil wasn't finished. He teamed up with Owen Hart, Bret's high-flying younger brother, and the hype was real. Hit that like button. If you think Owen was one of the greats, we need to get his legacy trending. It was a fresh spin on a winning formula. You had the Anvil's raw power paired with Owen's gravity-defying skills, and the new foundation hit the scene with serious momentum. They ditched the pink and black for those baggy, colorful pants that screamed early 90s vibes. But standing toe-to-toe with giants like the Natural Disasters was a tall order. Earthquake and Typhoon brought the kind of heavy artillery that even Jim had to respect, resulting in ring-shaking clashes all over the map. Then you had the Beverly Brothers offering a totally different headache. Bo and Blake were technical sharks who loved fighting dirty whenever the ref's back was turned. The new Foundation's bouts with them had sparks of brilliance, teasing that maybe Owen and Jim could capture that lightning-in-a-bottle magic of the original team. But pro wrestling is a weird beast, and sometimes the pieces just don't fit the puzzle perfectly. Even with Owen's insane potential and Jim's veteran status, the new Foundation never quite exploded like its predecessor. The chemistry was there, but the timing was off. By February 15, 1992, it was all over, though nobody realized it was their swan song at the time. Their brief partnership turned into one of the industry's big what-ifs. You had Owen's finesse, Jim's muscle, and the family bloodline, but sometimes talent alone isn't enough to grab the brass ring. That last match wasn't just the end of a duo. It closed a chaotic chapter in Jim's career. Then 1992 came in, like a wrecking ball backstage. Confronted with a mandatory drug screening, Jim made a split-second decision that changed his trajectory. The Anvil, famous for his volatility in the ring, let that temper loose in the locker room. Legend has it, a TV monitor went airborne, serving as his violent resignation letter to the company that put him on the map. But you can't keep a guy like that down. Jim stormed the indie circuit with a massive chip on his shoulder. We are talking high school gyms and small town halls, anywhere with a canvas and a crowd hungry for the Anvil. It wasn't the bright lights of the big arenas, but it kept his edge sharp and his reputation dangerous. Then came 1993 and a call from WCW. They were desperate for legit stars, and Jim walked in with name recognition and serious credentials. His showdowns with Sting proved he could go toe-to-toe with the elite. The Stinger might have been the face of the company, but Jim pushed him to the limit, showing everyone the Anvil wasn't just a tag team guy. His beef with Rick Rude felt deeply personal, almost like spillover from their WWF tenure. No tag ropes to hold. No partners to save you, just two seasoned vets trading blows and telling stories in the ring. Jim demonstrated that his power style translated perfectly to singles action, even against a technical wizard like Rude. This WCW run revealed a whole new side of the Anvil, stripped of the Hart Foundation branding and the iconic gear. He stood tall on his own merits. Every slam and every win belonged to him, proving that while the team was legendary, the man was a force all by himself. Wrestling put his name in lights, but he had more up his sleeve. The guy who used to heave actual anvils for cash was stepping onto fresh turf and making his presence felt. He was scripting his legacy one bout at a time. Then came 1994 in the WWF, dropping a bombshell that caught everyone off guard. The Anvil didn't just return, he came back with a massive chip on his shoulder, teaming up with Owen Hart to take down Bret. The crowd was shell-shocked. Bret's own brother-in-law and former tag partner was suddenly standing across the ring as an adversary. There he was, grinning next to the younger Hart in what turned into a deeply personal family war. The King of the Ring served as the backdrop for this violent domestic dispute. On one side, you had Bret and his ride-or-die, the British Bulldog. Opposite them, Owen and Jim, former buddies turned bitter rivals. This match wasn't about securing a W, it was a battle for family honor and payback. Every slam felt heavier. Since they knew each other inside out, the insults stung worse. The Anvil unleashed a darker, nastier streak that night. The charismatic Tank who used to dominate alongside Bret was gone. A cruel, vicious iteration of Jim took his place. Victory wasn't enough. He wanted to inflict pain. There was real venom behind every power move. He designed every jeer to rattle the hitman. Playing the villain against Bret unlocked a fresh intensity in Jim's game. He had Bret's playbook memorized, every habit, every tell, and he weaponized that intel. The same power game that once protected Bret's technical wizardry was now dismantling him. It transcended wrestling. It was masterclass storytelling. This sport runs on raw feelings, and this bout was overflowing with them. Seeing Jim, the guy Bret used to trust with his life trying to end him, added a level of tragedy you don't get in standard good versus evil scripts. It proved the Anvil could work both sides of the aisle, turning fan adoration into heat. Smash that like button if you missed this golden era of wrestling. Fast forward to 1997, and the industry exploded in a way no one predicted. The Hart Foundation wasn't just reunited. They were evolved, meaner and prouder. Draped in Canadian flags, they snubbed American crowds while being worshipped back home. Jim was right back in the mix with the Hart brothers dead center in the hottest angle in the business. The noise was unprecedented. Stateside, they were the bad guys, the villains trashing the USA. But hop across the border, and they were gods. The Anvil and the crew didn't just get applause in the Great White North. They received the kind of hysteria usually reserved for stadium rock bands. Every show turned into a wild festival, or a near riot depending on the zip code. Then came July 6, 1997 in Calgary. In Your House Canadian Stampede. Everything clicked for a legendary night. The ring was packed with heavy hitters. You had Stone Cold Steve Austin on his rise to immortality, Ken Shamrock, the most dangerous man on the planet. The Legion of Doom and Goldust brought the muscle and the bizarre. Standing in their way, the Hart Foundation defending their home turf. The Calgary audience went beyond loud. They were absolutely nuclear. Every time Jim or his boys moved, the place erupted. When the Anvil dropped the hammer, the foundations rattled. This was way more than a standard fight. It felt like a tribute to the Hart legacy and everything they'd constructed over the decades. Unbeknownst to everyone, this was Jim's final curtain call on the major stage. If you gotta bow out on pay-per-view, doing it in Calgary, surrounded by blood relatives and fans who worshipped the ground you walked on, that's how you write an exit. The faction's win wasn't just a mark in the column, it was the ideal conclusion to a saga that began ages ago. It came full circle from Stu Hart's basement dungeon to the bright lights, but stepping out of that spotlight is tough. For Jim, the post-ring years spun a narrative much grimier than any scripted storyline. When the cheers die down and the mat stops shaking, the quiet can drive you crazy. The Anvil felt that silence hard. This business chews people up. Decades of taking bumps, delivering slams, and highway miles wrecked him. And the physical pain was just the half of it. Like so many pros, Jim had a hard time adjusting to a reality that didn't run on bell times and booking sheets. You can't just replace the high of performing for thousands. September 6, 2010 wasn't just a calendar day. It stood as a harsh marker of a celebrity spiraling out of control. The rap sheet looked like a nightmare possession with intent trafficking, burglary, grand theft. The icon who threw anvils for fun and wore gold belts was now grabbing headlines for criminal behavior. The mugshot showed a side no fan wanted to witness. Every charge whispered the ugly truth about addiction. It highlighted the desperate lengths people go to when the fame evaporates and real life crashes in. Pills and powders had filled the void left by the roar of the crowd. The specialist who used to break into matches was now getting busted for breaking into houses. This era of Jim's life was a brutal wake-up call. Let's talk about the gritty underbelly of the wrestling biz, how it rockets talent to the moon, but gives them zero bang. Help for the inevitable crash landing. That manic energy that turned him into a ring icon became his worst enemy in the real world, transforming the Anvil's retirement into a grim warning about how fast stardom evaporates and the struggle to find meaning once the cheering stops. That messy bust at the gas station ripped the mask off the superstar lifestyle, exposing a guy drowning in a fight way harder than any steel cage match. The Anvil, famous for staring down the industry's scariest giants, was now forced to confront his own nightmares. When the cops rolled up, they didn't see a polished pro athlete. They found a confused soul high on pills, his legendary power twisting into scary aggression. Fast forward to that courtroom in March 2012, and the vibe was nothing like a sold-out arena. Instead of screaming fans, he was facing down a judge who wasn't impressed. A 6-month stint behind bars was never in the script, and throwing a tantrum during sentencing just dug his grave deeper. Catching that contempt charge was like watching a champ intentionally take a loss. But even in that gloom, the loyalty of the Wrestling Brotherhood really shined. You'd think WWE would cut ties with a liability, but they didn't abandon their guy. They actually paid for his rehab twice, trying to guide the former champ back to sanity. Please like the video if you respect that kind of loyalty. It wasn't just corporate PR. It was an admission that buried under the Anvil gimmick was a human worth saving. Those trips to rehab told a totally different story, not about heels and faces, but about a real man trying to pin his addiction for the 3 count. Every attempt was a desperate kickout just before the end, refusing to let the drugs score. The final fall. The same company that built his fame was now fighting to help him win his most critical victory against himself. In those moments, the scripted drama faded into raw, painful reality. The guy who used to throw heavy metal for fun was struggling to carry his own baggage. For the fans who remembered his prime, reading these headlines hurt more than a chair shot, a harsh reminder that the hardest bouts have no referee or ring ropes. Then, in a quiet Florida house on the morning of August 13, 2018, the final bell tolled for the Anvil. The account his wife Elizabeth gave wasn't about the high-impact action we knew. Instead, the scene was quiet and heartbreaking. Just a routine moment adjusting the air conditioning turned into a tragic twist. That strange, stiff movement she witnessed wasn't a performance. Jim, who had been managing meds for seizures, moved in a way that froze her blood before hitting the wall and collapsing. She didn't wait a second. She dialed 911 instantly, but sometimes speed isn't enough. The 4-inch wound they found told the cruel story of his end. It's ironic the man who survived brutal ring wars and got tossed by the industry's biggest monsters was taken out by a simple fall. At 63, all that brute strength couldn't stop this last opponent. And finding out he had early-stage Alzheimer's just added another layer of darkness. The disease that erases memories was already there, threatening to steal the very legacy he built. County officials ruled it an accident. That doesn't numb the pain, though. Jim, father-husband icon, had left the building for the last time. No more manic laughter, no more goatee-stroking insanity that echoed through the arenas. Just snapshots of a larger-than-life character frozen in time. The Hart DNA is woven into the very fabric of the business, and you see it clearly in Natalya's work. Every time she hits the canvas, the Anvil is right there with her, the power, the technique. Even that strut, it's pure Hart Dynasty, pure Jim spirit. Watch her work and you'll catch ghosts of the past. When she locks in the sharpshooter, she's not just borrowing Uncle Bret's finisher, she's honoring a tradition and Jim helped lay the bricks for. That pink and black gear isn't just a look, it's a flag flying for The Hart Foundation's golden era. Her dad and uncle revolutionized tag teams, but it goes deeper than just spandex and colors. Natalya channels that specific mix of raw power and precision. She can toss rivals around with that familiar Anvil strength, then switch to technical holds that would make the Hart Dungeon proud. It's living history. The new generation writing the next chapter of the family saga. In the women's division, she stands out not just for talent, but as true wrestling royalty. Every mention of the Hart Foundation keeps Jim's spirit alive in the ring. The messy end doesn't erase the glory. If anything, it makes the legend more relatable and human. Jim Neidhart's impact on the industry didn't vanish, it simply evolved. The Beast, famous for throwing heavy iron for fun, is still very much alive every time his daughter hits the canvas. You can see that Hart Foundation pride burning in every stitch of her pink and black gear. The Anvil saga didn't truly wrap up on that morning in August 2018. Instead, it found a fresh avenue to dazzle us inside the ropes. If you look strictly at the numbers, Jim's track record is undeniably solid. You have the tag team gold and decades of main events. However, this business isn't about math. It is about those unforgettable snapshots that burn into a fan's brain, and the Anvil delivered those in bulk. Just close your eyes, and I bet that maniacal cackle still rings in your ears. That wasn't just a quirk. It was Jim's signature stamp on every interview, every win, and every peak moment of his career. In an industry crowded with cartoonish figures, he demanded attention without needing smoke and mirrors. It was all about brute force, magnetic personality, and that iconic laugh. Remember the glory of WrestleMania 6 when he took home the gold? Or how the Hart Foundation completely redefined tag team dynamics? Every body slam and every bone-crushing maneuver narrated the journey of a guy who went from hurling metal at the Calgary Stampede to throwing human beings in sold-out arenas. But Jim's tale isn't all championship belts. It is filled with a heavy dose of real-world pain. Once the arena lights cut out and the fans leave, and the deafening cheers fade into quiet, that is usually when the hardest fights actually start. His personal demons are a stark reminder that even the toughest giants are fighting battles behind closed doors that we know nothing about. From the grit of the dungeon to the glam of global stardom, from high highs to crushing lows, the Anvil's life was exactly like the sport he loved. Spectacular, intense, sometimes beautiful, and often tragic. Now Natalya keeps that torch burning, proving that the legends created inside the ropes resonate long after the final bell. You really need to watch our breakdown on Rick Rude and how his final bout spiraled into a tragic conclusion. Please hit the like button if you want us to uncover more hidden stories from the ring. Catch you in the next one.